You guys ever notice, like, when adults greet each other for the first time or they're meeting somebody, they always start with introducing themselves and then they ask the question, what do you do for a living? Right? If you don't believe me or you haven't noticed this, just pay attention the next time that your parents or an adult that you know introduces themselves to another adult. They always shake each other's hand, you know, my name is, and then what do you do? And whenever I'm asked this question and I respond, you know, I work with middle school students or I'm a student pastor, you know, they always give me this look like, oh, like, well, you're crazy, or, you know, oh, well, good luck with that, you know, or how's that going? and it's funny to me, like, middle schoolers a lot of time get a bad rap. They're accused of being lazy or disrespectful, or all they care about is Fortnite, right? And it's frustrating for me because I understand you guys. I see your true potential. I know what you have to offer the world. And I know that sometimes you just get a bad rap because people don't understand you. And I know that that can be a difficult place to be as a middle school student. And so I sympathize with that, but man, I love you guys. You guys are spontaneous. You do things sometimes without thinking, which is probably to a lot of the frustration that adults feel towards your age group at times. But I think it's just hilarious sometimes because, well, for instance, one time I was at a previous ministry and working at a different church, and we were doing the celebration. And in this celebration, there was cake. And all of a sudden, I realized that I had cake all over my face because one of my students had just come up and smashed the cake in my face. And so they caught it on video and everything. It was honestly pretty funny. Like, I just laughed it off. I wasn't mad. And I love that about you guys, because when you feel comfortable with someone, you can play jokes, you can do something. You don't take life too seriously yet. And I think there's a joy that can be found in that. So yes, I love middle schoolers, but you don't need me to tell you that not every adult in the world has the highest opinion of middle schoolers. While all the adults in this room absolutely love you guys and think you're full of potential, a lot of adults feel that middle school age students are lazy, entitled, immature, self-seeking, and just ignorant of the way the real world works. And some of you probably hear that and it's frustrating, but some of you hear that and you get it. You have peers, you've been to the middle school cafeteria, you've been in the hallway at school, and you know how sometimes your age group can treat adults or act towards each other, and so you get the stereotype. But it's frustrating for you when you're lumped in with the rest of the students and you know that you don't act that way. And so that can add to the frustration. But what else can add to the frustration is when sometimes adults don't act any different than middle schoolers, but yet they seem to get away with it. I mean, how many times have you been in the car and you see another adult driver who gives an inappropriate sign with their hand to another adult driver because they don't appreciate the way that they're driving, right? Or maybe you're in Meijer or Kroger and you see somebody at the customer service desk just ripping them a new one because they didn't like that their coupon had expired in 2009 and they thought that they should still accept it, right? And so this is incredibly frustrating when you as a middle schooler are accused of some of the same things that you see adults doing all the time. So it doesn't seem fair that some of the same adults who accuse you as a middle schooler of doing some of those things are guilty of doing those very things themselves. So what do? Do you just throw up your hands in frustration and say, well, forget it, or well, this is already what they think about me, so I might as well just be this way. This is what everybody expects of me, so why should I be any different? And I think that that's not the appropriate response to that, but it does beg the question, what do you do? It is frustrating to feel underestimated and to feel underappreciated, misjudged, and undervalued. But who could understand this pain and frustration just as much as you? We look to, and we talked about this last week, we started this conversation where Paul had Timothy, and he had planted Timothy in Ephesus and had given him the responsibility to lead this church. And Timothy was young, so he was often underestimated, and people didn't always think the best things about him. And in a lot of ways, middle schoolers feel the same way that Timothy did back in the New Testament, back when Paul was writing to him. And what I love about what Paul says to Timothy in this letter, it is not just to get over it, right? It's not just deal with it. He actually gives him tools and equips him how to handle that situation. So let's dive in and we're going to look at what he actually says. Here's what Paul wrote. He says, Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to your care. Turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge. And listen, you can't control what other people think about you. You can't control what other people's opinions of you are going to be. But what you can control is how you act and how you respond. Maybe to those very accusations or just to the world around you. Paul encouraged Timothy to just worry about himself. Don't worry about what everybody else is saying. You cannot control the world around you. What you can control is yourself. And you can control what you choose to do and say in response to the world. Because here's what Paul knew. There are always going to be distractions. There are always going to be reasons and excuses for Timothy to not live up to his potential. And sometimes that could be because of what everybody else is saying. But he also encourages him, you can take control and you can control what you say, what you do, regardless of what everybody else is saying. And eventually time will tell that you're the real deal. And when people get to know you, they're going to understand that there is something different about you and that you shouldn't be underestimated. So what we can do is we can choose to focus on ourselves. We can choose not to underestimate our own actions and instead believe that they actually carry weight and meaning. And that's a big ask for a young person. But I think Paul believes what I believe about middle schoolers, and that is you can do way more than what people give you credit for. You can use your actions right now to reflect the maturity, intelligence, and character that God has given you right now. And if that sounds hard, I want you just to remember the verse that we talked about last week. And in fact, we're going to do a little exercise and we're going to actually all say it together. I'm going to put the word up here on the screen and I want you all to read this verse with me out loud. Okay, this is going to be really awkward if you don't say this along with the video. So in all seriousness, say this with me. Okay, ready? This is 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. 1, 2, 3. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Paul reminded Timothy not to let anybody look down on him because of his age. And I would encourage the same thing for you. Don't allow what people's opinions of middle schoolers are to change what you're capable of and how you're going to respond to the world around you. Don't just respond the way that everybody expects you to because of some of the people your age that don't handle life well. Respond in a way that is worthy of the character of God. And in time, people will see that you are, in fact, the real deal. And you're not to be underestimated. We may not be able to choose what other people think of us, but we can choose whether or not we're going to give it any power. We can choose to focus on our own actions and to be an example for others. Never underestimate your actions. Can you imagine what might happen if you as a middle schooler started setting an example that even adults could learn from? I mean, that would be incredible. Sure, it might not change everybody's perception of middle schoolers overnight, but that doesn't even matter. Not underestimating your actions isn't about other people, it's about you. So instead of making excuses or blaming others, own your actions and work towards being an example that others could follow. And I want you to start with these steps. 1, I want you to think about your past actions. Think about this last week. Ask yourself these questions to start. Have I been disrespectful to an adult in my life? Was there a situation where I was selfish and didn't care about how I affected others around me? Does lazy describe my attitude toward homework, chores at home, or practice? What actions aren't setting the right example to others? When you identify the answer to those questions and make changes to them, then your whole world will start to change. And the way people perceive you is going to change as well. Second, don't underestimate your future actions. Just because you have a reputation for something doesn't mean that that has to dictate how you're going to behave for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to dictate what you're going to do tomorrow. You can choose to make a decision and change the way that you behave now. This is going to sound really silly, but I remember specifically when I was in the 5th grade, I decided, you know what, I was done being childish. I remember actually having the thought, I'm tired of always being in trouble for talking out of turn and not waiting till I was called on when I raised my hand or something like that. And I actually wanted my teacher to see me as a well-behaved, hard-working kid. And so I can't even explain it. It was like something clicked inside my head and I was like, no, I'm gonna stop that. My reputation was for being obnoxious and annoying and interrupting conversations, but I chose that I didn't want to be perceived that way anymore. As a 5th grader, and this isn't like, wow, pat me on the back, right? Good job, Zach, because I had tons of mistakes that I still made and still make, and I'm just trying to point out that you don't have to let your past reputation affect your future decisions, because it doesn't. You can choose to be mature, you can choose to set an example and start walking towards something better even now. And listen, I know that this might sound hard for some of you, but I believe that with practice you can become really great at this. You can be ahead of the other kids your age and set an example that honestly reflects Christ, that makes people want to know what's different about you and what's different about being a Christian than just everybody else who walks through life aimlessly. So don't underestimate your actions. As you guys get ready to go into your small groups, I want you to think about this one question. Are any of my actions not setting the best example for others? I want you to think about that question, and then you guys are dismissed to your small groups. I miss seeing you guys this week, but I will see you next week. Have fun in your groups.